At that moment, a hand firmly grasped hers. "Lariette, are you all right? Who made you cry?" Larette's previous panic instantly subsided with those simple words and the comforting touch. "I'm not crying, I just missed you so much. I ran out. Let's just go straight home today." From that day on, Lariette seemed increasingly absent-minded. Even for today's hug, Candel had to remind her, and when she did embrace him, it felt perfunctory. Candel wished he could stay by her side, but he had an important meeting to attend. The weather outside mirrored Larette's somber thoughts, gloomy and overcast. Earlier that day, she had received a letter from her mother. It was filled with pleas for forgiveness and a request to meet in person. The sentiment expressed between the lines made Lariette laugh bitterly. Still, she eventually agreed to the meeting. Her mother had been waiting for some time and beamed when she saw Lariette arrive. "Try this, it should taste good," her mother said, her tone so gentle and apologetic, a stark contrast to the harsh words Lariette remembered. "Don't you have something to say to me?" Lariette asked, her voice cold. Her mother lowered her head, her expression full of regret. "I've been so sorry lately. I didn't take good care of you before, and only after losing you did I realize how precious you are. I even fell ill and was bedridden for so long because of it." Lariette abruptly stood up, interrupting the confession. "I've heard your apology, but I don't plan to return." As Lariette prepared to leave, her mother suddenly started confessing again. "Lariette, I'm really sorry this time. I didn't mean to." Before Lariette could understand the cryptic words, a hand reached from outside the room, and in an instant everything went black. She lost consciousness. Blanche, who had orchestrated it all, glanced at her limp body with disdain, as if she were nothing more than trash. Turning to Larette's mother, he spoke with a chilling calm. "Didn't I tell you, apologies never bring a runaway daughter back?" The cold handcuffs that now bound Lariette had magic woven into them. Blanche had gone to great lengths to ensure she would not escape this time. Just like that, Lariette was returned to the room where she had been imprisoned as a child. When morning came and the sun finally broke through the window, the door behind her opened. "I locked you up so you could reflect," Blanche said, stepping inside. "But it seems you've learned nothing." "I didn't do anything wrong," Lariette retorted. "Didn't do anything wrong." Blanche's voice was thick with anger. Before Lariette could continue, his hand struck her hard across the face. The blow left her reeling, but before she could regain her bearings, he grabbed her again. One slap wasn't enough to quell his rage. "You say you—" His words trailed off as the slaps were drowned by the sound of thunder outside. This time, Lariette no longer had the strength to stand. "I spent so much money raising you and you ran off to that monster's house," Blanche spat. "You even instructed that creature to disfigure your brother's face. Until you reflect properly, don't even think about leaving this room." After Blanche's fury subsided, Ron stepped in, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look at you now. It's pathetic. Do you know what kind of humiliation I've suffered because of you?" But before Ron could revel in his cruelty, Lariette lunged and bit off a piece of flesh from his outstretched hand. "Don't you? You lunatic!" Ron shrieked, terrified. Lariette spat the flesh from her mouth with contempt. The arrogance Ron had just moments ago dissolved into fear. "She's gone mad," he muttered, backing away, horrified, "just like that monster Duke." This brutal scene was all witnessed by Zhou Lang. After Ron fled the scene in a panic, Lariette collapsed to the ground, her strength drained. In the solitude of the cold, empty room, she finally let her facade fall. Alone, her thoughts turned to that warm figure. "Where are you now, Candel?" Just then, Anna's voice broke the silence. "Miss, Duke Candel is here." Larette's silent prayer had been answered. Despite everything her father had done, using her as a tool, showing his dominance through slaps and imprisonment, when faced with Candel's wrathful gaze, Blanche cowered like a beaten dog, too terrified to utter a word. The cold room seemed even more hollow as Larette's longing for Candel intensified. Her thoughts clung desperately to his image. Miss, Duke Candel is here. He's downstairs right now, Anna repeated. Blanche stormed out of the room, muttering curses under his breath. Duke Candel, you're being incredibly rude, he growled. Candel stood at the entrance, his face calm but eyes burning with fury. I'm here to pick up my lover. Blanche instantly paled. I don't know what you mean, he stammered. I'm saying I'm here to take Lariette, Candel replied coldly. Duke Blanche, you'd better let her go. I'm afraid you won't be able to handle the consequences if you don't. Blanche's bluster faltered. He could see now that Candel wasn't asking for permission. He was issuing a command. Inside the room, Lariette trembled as she heard of Candel's arrival. She rushed to the window and, through the glass, finally saw his familiar figure. Candel, you've finally come to get me. Without hesitation, she yanked down the curtain, wrapping it around her left hand. In the next second, the glass shattered under the force of her strike. Barefoot, she stepped through the scattered shards, barely feeling the pain. The sunlight that greeted her was blinding, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming relief that surged through her. Candel! Lariette shouted his name for all to hear as she stood on the windowsill, basking in the light of her newfound freedom. Her heart was soaring, but as she smiled, the bruises on her face were impossible to ignore. Candel's expression turned from joy to horror, his smile fading. His gaze darkened, filled with murderous intent, and it sent a tremor through Blanche. You will pay with your lives. Candel's voice was calm, but the threat in it was unmistakable. At that moment, Lariette gently placed a hand on his cheek. Candel, let's go. I want to go home. Back to our home? After a long pause, Candel smiled and nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Blanche erupted in fury. Where are you taking my daughter? He barked madly. But Candel's only response was a cold, piercing gaze. Blanche's confusion deepened as he glanced at the bruises on Lariette's face. I didn't hit her that hard. Why such a fuss? He thought, unable to comprehend the severity of his actions. The reason Candel had arrived so swiftly was thanks to Joel's tip-off. Joel, one of the few in the household who treated Lariette kindly, had secretly helped her. Once inside the carriage, Candel wasted no time tearing off the shackles that bound Lariette's wrists. The contrast in their emotions as they headed home was stark. Piano, thank you for coming to get me, Lariette said softly. But Candel's heart was heavy with guilt. He had even considered destroying Lariette's family entirely. I'm sorry, Lariette, I came too late, he murmured, his voice filled with regret. Lariette didn't respond directly to his apology. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Candel, can I kiss you? I really want to kiss you right now. Candel hesitated only for a moment. Of course, if you're willing, he replied, his voice gentle. After a while, Lariette was the first to pull away, but Candel wasn't ready to let go. Lariette, I haven't had enough. Can I keep kissing you? No matter what, it never feels like enough. It was in this moment that Lariette fully realized her feelings. Candel, I like you, she confessed, her voice trembling with sincerity. This time, her words came from the deepest part of her heart. She hadn't fully understood how much she liked him until now. Although she knew the story's ending, she couldn't stop herself from following her heart. For the first time, the thought of being separated from him terrified her. Their emotions burned in the intensity of each other's gaze. All that remained was their undeniable love. But then, Lariette paused, realizing that her condition wasn't quite right for things to go further. Candel seemed to sense it too. As much as I want you right now, Candel said, his voice thick with desire. This isn't the time. All right, Lariette agreed. Everything as you say. Just as they were about to settle into each other's arms again, the clever butler, usually so tactful, interrupted them at the worst possible moment. The priest has arrived, he announced. His timing couldn't have been worse. Lariette's heart raced as Dalia, the priest, entered the room, his gaze as cold and unsettling as Candel's. Lariette, who did this to you? Dalia asked, his voice low and sharp. His tone sent a shiver down Larette's spine. I believe I told you before, Dalia continued, his eyes narrowing. Don't get hurt so easily. It seems you didn't take my words to heart. At that moment, his gaze fell on Larette's wrist. She followed his eyes, suddenly realizing what he had noticed. The bracelet you gave me. It was too beautiful. I couldn't bear to wear it, she explained hurriedly. Dalia's frown deepened. And because of that, I didn't notice, he muttered. But something else caught his attention. The slightly dishevelled state of her lips. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. These injuries, they couldn't possibly be from your lover. Before he could finish, Lariette interrupted him firmly. How could it be I was kidnapped? Her words hung in the air, sharp and decisive, leaving no room for doubt. After Dalia's treatment, Lariette quickly recovered. As Dalia finished up, she reminded Lariette, remember to wear the bracelet next time, all right? Just then, Dalia noticed something she had missed before. Larette's feet were full of glass shards. You didn't mention this injury. Were you planning to just leave it like this? Dalia asked, concerned. As she gently stroked Larette's foot, Larette's face flushed bright red. Dalia, my feet are dirty, she muttered, embarrassed. In Larette's mind, Daexia must have been cherished all her life. This kind of work, tending to wounds, probably seemed foreign and beneath her. Little did Lariette know, Daexia's early life had been anything but glamorous. Humiliation and hardship had been her constant companions as she grew up. After Dalia left, Lariette turned her attention back to Candel, determined to continue healing him. When Candel removed his shirt, revealing his impressive physique, Lariette blushed. His 32 abs gleamed, the curse that once marred his body nearly gone. Lariette, are you sure your body's okay? Candel asked, his concern clear. But Larette's mind wasn't focused on herself. During the day they had been inseparable, but now, standing together, they felt an awkwardness between them, as if meeting for the first time. Gently, Lariette began to caress Candel's body, and with her touch, the last trace of the curse on his upper body disappeared. Candel, the curse on your upper body is completely gone, she said, her voice soft but triumphant. Candel looked down at himself, hardly able to believe it. Lariette, I can't thank you enough, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. But Lariette wasn't done yet. Candel, it's too early to thank me, she replied with a smile. I'm about to finish healing you completely. The lower body evolution is next. Suddenly they both froze, realizing the implication of her words. As Lariette had been focused on healing his upper body, she had forgotten about the curse lingering on his lower body. For a moment they stood there, faces flushed, unsure of what to do next. After all, the previous evolutions had required Candel to remove his clothes. Didn't that mean the next evolution would too? The next evolution will take a while. Let's rest for now, we have time. We'll deal with it next time, Lariette said, trying to sound casual. At that moment, Candel shyly lowered his head. Actually, that area is fine, he mumbled. His voice was soft, but to Lariette, it sounded deafening. Larette's face burned, and she quickly interjected, Please, Candel, don't explain any more. She hadn't expected the curse to be so humanized, and it caught her completely off guard. To avoid curling her toes in embarrassment, Lariette fled the scene this time. Back in her room, she replayed the events of the day. From Candel rescuing her to Dalia treating her injuries and Joel and Annie tipping her off. They were all people who had become so important to her. Yet, for the first half of her life, she had foolishly devoted herself to her family, always seeking their approval. If it hadn't been for her terminal illness, she likely wouldn't have met Candel. Nor would she have experienced someone showing jealousy because of her. These new attachments in her life made Lariette even more fearful of separation. Still, in her eyes, Candel didn't seem to love her with the same intensity she felt for him. So, even if she died, he would probably move on. After all, They had only been lovers for 3 months. Just then, a sudden clap of thunder outside startled Lariette. In the flash of lightning, she thought she saw Blanche's figure again, her palm raised menacingly with each rumble of the storm. One thunderclap after another roared through the night, making the figure in Lariette's mind grow clearer and more menacing. Desperate to escape the haunting vision, she bolted barefoot down the corridor. The only person who could save her now was Candel. Candel looked at her, concerned. "What's wrong, Lariette? It's cold outside. Come in," he said softly. Trembling all over, Lariette sat down on the sofa without a word. "Would you like a cup of tea, or are you feeling unwell?" Candel asked. "No," Lariette murmured. "I'm just afraid of the thunder, but more than that, I think I'm scared of being alone." Another deafening crash of thunder erupted outside the window, and Lariette instinctively threw herself into Candel's arms. Though her body was still shaking, the storm felt a little less terrifying in his embrace. As Candel held her, it reminded him of the fears he, too, had faced in the past. In that moment, it was as if they were seeking solace in each other, both hoping to find redemption. "Can I sleep here tonight? I'll just hold your hand," Lariette whispered, her voice fragile. Candel hesitated, and Larette's heart sank. "Is it not allowed?" she asked, disappointed. "Never mind, I'll go back to my room." Just as she was about to leave, another crash of thunder seemed to echo her heartbreak. Candel quickly pulled her back. "Tonight you can sleep in my room," he said, his voice tender. Though they'd had physical contact before, this was the first time they would share a bed. Lariette smiled faintly and reassured him. "Don't worry, I won't do anything. Just relax." Candel blushed, embarrassed, covering his chest as if to protect himself. "Lariette, don't tease me like that," he stammered, clearly flustered. But the more he acted this way, the more amused Lariette became. "Lariette, please stop teasing," he begged, his face growing redder. Suddenly, Candel grabbed her hand, his tone turning serious. "Lariette, don't make me do something I'll regret," he said softly. "Please." Another loud clap of thunder startled Lariette, her fear evident on her face. Candel paused, realizing that her playful demeanor was just a way to cope with her terror. He squeezed her hand tightly, pulling her close once again. This time he embraced her fully, whispering soothing words as she trembled in his arms. The thunder outside seemed to become an unexpected ally, cocooning them together in the storm. Meanwhile, at Duke Blanche's mansion, Ron remained severely injured, unable to get treatment from any clerics. Every time they tried to reach one, they were told none were available. Ever since Candel's last visit, Ron had been living in fear. Just making eye contact with one of Candel's subordinates had been enough to send him tumbling down the stairs. His previous injuries had yet to heal, and now he had a broken leg too. He cursed under his breath. If only that girl Lariette were here. Perhaps she could have healed him. After much deliberation, Blanche decided to take matters into his own hands and visit the temple personally. The imposing structure of the Altion temple loomed before him as he approached, dragging his limping son behind. He muttered under his breath, "There are dozens of clerics here. Why won't they treat him?" A stern voice cut through the air. "Who dares to cause such a commotion in the Altion temple?" Dalia, standing nearby, spotted Blanche and couldn't suppress a smirk. "Finally, it's my turn." Despite Blanche's usual bluster, he was always obedient in front of Dalia. But Ron, his son, wasn't so compliant. "My son needs treatment. I was only anxious," Blanche explained, his voice more humble than usual. The real reason for his frustration, however, was that Dalia had specifically ordered the clerics not to visit his household. "It seems my subordinates made an error," Dalia said, feigning sympathy. "As an apology, I'll treat him personally." Blanche's face lit up. This was a rare opportunity. If he could forge a connection with Dalia, perhaps he could regain his former status and glory. He eagerly followed Dalia into the treatment room. Once inside, Dalia closed and locked the door behind them. His tone shifted as he focused on Ron. How did you get injured? I missed a step, Ron mumbled, trying to maintain some dignity. Without warning, Dalia stepped closer, grabbing Ron's hand and inspecting it. His eyes fell on a small wound, a bite mark. Is this wound from your misstep as well? Dalia asked, his voice laced with curiosity. He gazed at the mark, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. I didn't expect Larette's bite to be so delicate. The comment made Ron flush with embarrassment, his anger rising. Realizing he crossed a line, Dalia quickly composed himself. Apologies. Let me treat you immediately. Although it was just a bite mark, it had no place remaining on Ron's body. Dalia's skilled hands began to work, leaving Ron stewing silently as his pride suffered more than his wounds. After a brief flash of golden light, Dalia healed only Ron's hand. But the earlier rudeness from Dalia left Ron in a simmering rage. Everyone's been saying you're the son of a street prostitute, Ron spat, his voice dripping with disdain. You think those are just baseless rumors? How shallow of you. Dalia, no longer bothering to hide his disdain, met Ron's gaze with icy calm. Duke Dell was too lenient with you. His voice was dripping with mockery. For someone as arrogant as you, he only beat you? He should have crippled you, at least. At this, Ron's anger exploded. He swung a fist toward Dalia, but it was an easy miss. Instead, he lost his balance and fell flat on his face. There she watched with a sneer. With such weak moves, who were you trying to hit? Ron's head spun, dizziness overtaking him. Dalia had anticipated it. Feeling dizzy, are we? Dalia observed, almost enjoying Ron's panic. I just tangled your spiritual energy circuits. If left untreated, you'll die from energy overload in a few months. He gave Ron a cruel smirk. Interesting, isn't it? Ron's bravado faltered completely. Unless someone stronger than me comes along, Dalia continued, his voice laced with menace, no one can cure you. What will you do now? Ron's arrogance was gone, replaced by fear. Dalia gently stroked his head, his tone turning cold. If you lay a hand on Lariette again, that will be the last thing you ever do. Meanwhile, in another room, Lariette had woken up in bed, staring intently at the person beside her. A dreamy smile spread across her face. Is this a blessing from God? Waking up to see such a handsome face. She added another masterpiece to her mental gallery. You look exhausted, she teased. Didn't sleep well last night? Oh, is he? Candel replied, his voice tired but amused. This guy was so excited he didn't sleep at all. Lariette giggled before sitting up. What do I have planned today? She mused aloud. Well, I'm going to see Dalia. Her appearance in pyjamas made Candel forget his jealousy for a moment. All right, but come back soon. He sighed, his voice softening. After you find Dalia, I want to sleep with you again. Lariette smiled, feeling content with the moment and the man beside her. After a brief silence from Candel, he was so startled by her words that he didn't know how to react. Seeing his flustered state, Lariette burst into laughter. I'm just kidding, she teased. Were you actually looking forward to sleeping with me? What Lariette didn't know was that Candel hadn't slept all night because of her incredibly outrageous sleeping posture. As he walked out of the room, he ran into the terrier. Master, the old man said with a mischievous smile, I always believed this day would come. He was even more excited than the two who had shared a bed. In the butler's mind, he was already picturing Candel and Lariette's wedding. I should ask Lariette what kind of wedding dress she likes, the butler continued, his chatter bordering on overwhelming. Fortunately, Candel stopped him in time. Stop, don't say any more. Won't you let me speak? There's so much to do now, the butler replied, undeterred. Marriage is a lifelong commitment. We can't overlook any details. Candel fell into deep thought. Could it really happen for him? Someone like him shouldn't be so foolishly hopeful. But then there was Lariette, the one who had shattered the darkness around him. He couldn't help but picture himself in a suit, holding her hand, vowing to be together forever, but it was too soon to think about that. "I don't have any plans to get married at the moment," Candel said, his voice firm. The butler was shocked. "But you two have already shared a room." "I didn't do anything that requires taking responsibility," Candel replied quickly. The butler's hopes were dashed, though he wasn't discouraged. Perhaps Candel's years on the battlefield had left him out of touch with matters of the heart. With a mischievous grin, the butler spoke again, his charm undimmed by age. "Looks like I'll have to take matters into my own hands."